All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So reminder, our first exam is Wednesday. 35 questions. And because there's going to be more questions, they're not going to be, I don't want to say as in depth, but I got to keep it rolling. You got 50 minutes. So no question is going to be like, hopefully something you got to spend 10 minutes solving. So let's get going. So the first thing I want to show y'all is on Moodle. I have this PowerPoint. I'm going to have these PowerPoints for every group of, or for every joint. We're going to have a trunk PowerPoint. We're going to have a shoulder, an ankle again. And with this is something new, thanks to a former student, Hannah Long. And what it is it's a visual. I'm a visual learner. And I told you one of the limitations of pictures is it's a two-dimensional picture that sometimes we have a tough time seeing 3 dimensions in. And we got to look at it in different ways to see like an anterior pull, a lateral pull, or a transverse pull, right? A sagittal, a frontal, and a transverse. It's hard to see all that in one image. That's what I love about the cross-sectional circles. The way we have it set up, you can see all 3 planes of pull in one picture if it's a picture from the top, and we can see sagittal, we can see frontal, and we can see transverse. So this is how this PowerPoint works. So the muscles that you're going to be accountable for the cervical, they're in your PowerPoint, they're in the lectures, but this is a visual of how they pull. So let's look at the right sternocleidomastoid. It's a right lateral bending puller, or as we call it for short, a right lateral cervical bender. Okay, that's how it pulls. So let's press play and see how it pulls. And the reason it pulls that way is because it's on the right side of the anterior posterior axis. Now, notice nowhere in there did I say it's contracting. That stuff we have to figure out. Is it working? Is it not working? Functions of muscle has nothing to do with contractions. Functions of muscles, what do they do all the time? At rest, holidays, weekends. When you're sleeping, this muscle still pulls in the same direction. Does that make sense? It has nothing to do whether it's on or not, or whether it's working or not. It's how does it pull? So these visuals help us to see how this muscle that originates in your sternum and your clavicle and goes to your mastoid process, which is basically your ear, is trying to pull your right ear to your right shoulder. That's how it pulls. Cool? The harder one is the rotation. This is the one we kind of got tripped up with. So let's look at that. So notice how this muscle has what we call obliquity. That's what obliques is named there. It has an angle to it. It has an angle. In addition to trying to pull your right ear to your right shoulder, in addition to trying to pull your right ear to your sternum, the transverse pull is trying to bring your right ear and line it up with your sternum. Like I said, your mom grabs you by your right ear as a kid and pulls you forward. She's trying to make you look to your left, even though she's pulling on the ear on the right. So that's why the right sternocleidomastoid, and this is where students get, it makes sense. It's a right lateral, but it's a left transverse. It's a right lateral puller, but it's a left transverse pull. And I'm trying to explain why. Yoink, 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 yoink. Make sense? It's a right lateral puller, but it's a left transverse pull. Well, what happens when you need cervical flexors? you're going to use both sternocleidomastoids, which is great because they can cancel out frontally and they can cancel out transversely and work together for sagittal pull. Remember, this is just how they pull. Ah, I love that. Get a better visual. Anterior draw, anterior pull. Trying to bring your chin to your chest. Pulling in that direction. All right? Let's go to the erector spinae, visuals. Remember, we have stuff on the left side of the spine, stuff on the right side of the spine. They do not crisscross applesauce. And you got a bunch of them, hundreds of little ones and big ones, and we're just, for this class, we're making it a group of a group. Left erector, right erector. Grad school, have fun with spinalis, iliocastalis, longissimus, and all those infinite linear arteries. For this class, you got a group on the left and a group on the right. And again, it makes sense why you have to have so many to be able to work all day and not get tired. Like you have to dissipate that force over a lot of different muscles. So let's look at how they pull. The left is trying to pull left ear, left shoulder, just like the left sternocleido, because it crosses laterally to the AP axis. There's your torque, there's your moment. Now, here's the transverse. And I'm not going to say your mom. My mom was, I love her to death. Well, she was a 5th grade teacher, so she was very disciplinarian in our house. And I got in a lot of trouble as a kid. If she's in front of me, she's pulling right ear forward, trying to make me look to my left. But if I don't know she's behind me and I was doing something bad, if she grabs my left ear and pulls it back, it's a left transverse pull. Does that make sense? So look at how, and if you can't see it here, look on the sides. Watch how the erector spinae, see? On the left transverse puller. Trying to take the left ear area and pull it back. So how cool is that? This would be the worst scenario for me. Like, well, my dad would never do this, but just if I got in a lot of trouble and I had one parent in the front of me and one parent in the back of me, and one pulled my right ear forward and one pulled my left ear back, I might need a neck brace after that. But that's how these muscles work. That's what a force couple is that I have in your Moodle materials. Your right sterno is trying to make you look to the left, and your left erector is also trying to make you look to the left, transversely. Cancel out sagittal, cancel out frontal, both trying to spin you in the same direction. Function is based off of direction of pull. So let's look at the right. Same concepts, right ear, right shoulder. And then the right erector is trying to pull you to the right, transversely. So the erectors, the direction lines up frontal and transverse. Right erector is a right lateral and a right transverse. Left erector is a left lateral and a left transverse. But your sternos are right lateral and left transverses, and the left is a left lateral, right transverse. So watch what happens if you use them both at the same time. You cancel out transversely, you cancel out frontally, and they can work together to pull posteriorly. Yoink! Gravity's trying to do this. I need muscles that are pulling here. I want to cancel out here. I want to cancel out there. Hooray! Function has nothing to do with contraction. It has everything to do with ironically enough, when you strain a hip flexor, you are extending your hip because that flexion puller was putting on the brake eccentrically of extension. You feel it when you flex, but that's not what did the damage. A hip flexor functions as a hip flexor because it pulls that way. Remember, we don't want to learn muscles on specific motions. Sometimes I can flex because it's my bicep, and sometimes I could flex because it's my tricep. I don't want to say bicep does flexion, because you know what else the bicep can do? Extension, when it's working eccentric. But what the bicep does all the time, holidays, weekends, you're at rest, you're dead, it pulls in a direction of flexion. It's a flexion puller. It's a flexor, regardless of contraction. Flexor is going to cause the flexion through concentric, pulls in a direction of flexion. Flexors are going to prevent my elbow from falling down by pulling in a direction of flexion. My flexors are going to allow the extension through eccentrics while pulling in a direction of flexion. They always pull in the direction of flexion. That's why they get their name. That's why they get their function. It's all about direction of pull. What makes muscles pull in specific directions of joint motion? How they cross the joints. So again, guys, your PDF, this was last week's lecture that I held you accountable for. I give you, if you're not a circle person, that's okay. I give you the muscles you're going to be accountable for. I give you their specific functions. So on the test, if I say, what does the left sternocleidomastoid do? You don't have to learn a circle to know that. I'm giving it to you. That's the directions of motion it pulls in. I show you the muscles. I try to give you different views. Like for this one, this helps to see why it would pull in a direction of cervical flexion. This picture doesn't. This picture is a great one for a seesaw, right? Right lateral, left lateral. And the transverse one is tricky. That's why I try to give you a motion visual of the transverse. Two-dimensional pictures are limited in three-dimensional concepts. And then I get into cross-section. For me, this is a teaching tool. This might work for some of you. It may work for none of you. That's okay. I'm never going to ask you to draw a circle. But what we know about function is, for a muscle to function at a joint, it's got to cross the joint. It has to cross the joint to function. If a muscle doesn't cross my wrist, it can't function at my wrist. How it functions is, how does it cross the joint? If the muscle crosses my wrist anteriorly, it's going to be a flexion pull. And if it crosses my wrist posteriorly, it's going to be an extension pull. If it crosses my wrist medially, it's going to be an ulnar deviation puller, and laterally a radial deviation. So for our cervical, what I'm trying to show you is that every joint is somewhat circular. The cross-section allows us to see all three potential axes. Bilateral, which separates the flexion pullers from the extension pullers. If the muscle is anterior to the bilateral axis of a joint, it's going to be a flexion puller. Posterior is going to be an extension puller. The blue is anterior, posterior. If it's on the right side of the blue axis, it's going to be a right lateral. If it's on the left side, it's going to be a left lateral. And then we're going to PE. We're going to recess for the green polar axis. If it's trying to spin the merry-go-round this way, it's a right transverse puller. And if it's trying to spin the merry-go-round that way, it's a left transverse. And then all it is putting the muscles where they sit in that place. Who are the cervical flexors? Right and left sternocleidomastoids. Who are the cervical extensors? Right and left rectus spine. Who are the right lateral cervical benders? Right sternocleidomastoid, right erector spine. Who are the left lateral cervical benders? Left sternocleidomastoid, left erector spine. Who are the right transverse cervical rotators? Left sternocleidomastoid, right erector. Who are the left transverse cervical rotators? The right sternocleidomastoid, left erector spine. And you can see how this can be confusing if you just went off of lists or memory, because there's a lot of things that sound alike. And sometimes this muscle is pulling in the same direction as another, but sometimes it's not. It depends on the plane. These two are pulling in the same direction, but only in one plane. They do not pull in the same direction frontally, and they do not pull in the same direction transversely. That's one way understanding cross-sectional anatomy can be useful. Here's another way. What are the different functions of an individual muscle? What does the left erector spinae do? It's a cervical extension puller, a left lateral cervical bender, and a left transverse cervical rotator. Because I could literally just visualize how it's pulling. What does the right sternocleidomastoid do? Cervical flexor, right lateral cervical bender, left transverse cervical rotator. Stretching is based off of position. If I want to stretch flexion pullers, I need to be in an extended position. If I want to stretch left lateral benders, I need to right lateral. If I want to stretch my hamstrings, I got to flex because they're hip extensors. So that also is useful information. How would I stretch the right erector spinae in the frontal plane in its frontal pull? Well, frontally it pulls right laterally, so I want to make sure I bend to the left. My left sterno, sagittally, I want to make sure I extend. Frontally, I want to make sure I go right lateral. And then the tricky one, the transverse. Well, it pulls like this. So I don't want to be in that position if I'm trying to stretch it. I want to be in this position if I'm trying to stretch it. So how would I stretch the left sternocleidomastoid transversely? I don't want to look to the right. I actually want to look to my left. On the test, I'm going to have scratch paper. And when I say go, that's why we only have one cross-sectional area on the first test. And there was only 4 muscles. You got one in each quadrant. Because it does get a little trickier as we get more, as the classes get bigger and some muscles are on axes, and there's not a lot. So when I hand out your paper, you could have it all memorized. That's cool. Or you could draw your circle immediately and put the muscles in their place and use that as a way to answer all the questions. That's fine. Or you can write all of this. You can write all that information. It's all. All of this, all of these words is literally here. All of those words. That muscle pulls this way, and that way. This muscle pulls this way, and that way. I mean, it's 2 different forms of the same information. The reason I give it to you in different ways is because there's different learners. There are some people who just will not get the cross-sectional anatomy, and that's okay. It's okay. But there's others who are just going to be like, feed me. I get it. I like it. I want more of it. All right, guys, I'm going to open it up to you. What do y'all want to talk about? Sounded like a Tim McGraw song. I like it. I live it. I want some more in it. Across the shoulder. See, you got spiritual here. Don't tell Tim. Spiritual. All right, guys, we need someone to break the ice. Usually what happens is one person will step up and ask a question, and then everybody's like, okay, now I feel comfortable to ask questions.
Can you explain like the laws of like the Newton's law and
think this chart does a great summary. How many of you have ever heard about spin rate? Baseball. All that is angular kinematics, rotational motion. So in biomechanics, we have forces that influence motion. Newton's second law is the ultimate application of that, cause and effect. Forces affect other objects' motions. But remember in 310, I said, hey guys, I introduced you to this concept. There's straight line world and then there's rotational world. So in the area of forces, straight line world is pushes, pulls, gravities, because a force is a linear influence. But in rotational world, we use the word torque in mechanics, moment in biomechanics, rotational influences. Now, this word has force in it because a force applied to a perpendicular distance is what a torque is, right? So I can apply a force to this door, but that doesn't mean I'm applying a torque to the door. If the force is parallel to the axis, I'm not trying to open or close the door. So I'm still supplying a torque. It's just the torque would be zero, no matter how hard I push. It goes for 1,000,000 pounds. If there's zero perpendicular distance, there's no moment on this with the truth. Yes, I could close this truth. So angular forces, man, that's torque, right? So if you're trying to create spin on the ball, you have to create torque on the ball. And you're going to learn what affects that. Well, friction, if I put icy hot on my hands and then go try to throw a curveball, it won't generate as much torque, right? So there are different things that you can apply this, but force-wise, we have linear, straight line stuff, pushes, pulls, frictions, and then we have angular torques and moments. Movements, we have linear, where are you at, where are you going, rate about speeding up, position, velocity, acceleration. In angular world, we also have that similar thing. Again, spin rate is an example of angular velocity, right? Because the higher the spin rate, the faster it's spinning. Make sense? Pitchers that have better curveballs have higher spin rates because the ball has more angular velocity. For our joints, position, where is it at? Angular velocity, how fast is it rotating? Angular acceleration, speeding up, slowing down. Like I said, you pull a hip flexor because of angular acceleration, negative acceleration, slowing down that momentum and angularly. Okay? So all of Newton's laws literally can be summarized in this diagram. Law of inertia. Moment of inertia, rotational inertia. Remember, that was the example, like angular inertia is not just how much stuff, but how the stuff is distributed. Like that's why if you take a bat and spin it, it's not going to spin normally, it's going to wobble. Because the mass isn't distributed perfectly like if you would, like a baton, right? Inertia, angular inertia. Newton's second law, forces are directly proportional to objects' motions. Angular torques are directly proportional to objects. Angular changes, rotational changes of motion, F is equal to ma. And then Newton's third law was the force counterforce. If you're supplying a force to a baseball, if it feels you, you have to feel the baseball bat. If the bat feels the ball's got to feel the bat back. If you're touching the table's touching you. If you're not touching the table's not touching you. Newton's third law says that whatever is influencing each other has to feel the same amount in opposite directions, right? In other words, if I'm barely squeezing the cup, it's barely pushing back on me. If I squeeze it more, it pushes back on me. That's Newton's third law. For every force that an object feels, there must be an equal in magnitude and opposite directional counterforce. Something else has to feel. It's just how objects have to feel each other. The computer feels the roller. Roller feels the computer. Your bottle feels the desk feels the bottle. Your phone feels the desk feels the phone. And it also counts with gravity from planet Earth. Like, you feel planet Earth pulling you down, and it's significant to you and me. But 3,000 miles in the center of this planet, there's a little arrow from us that's pulling up. It's just the Earth's so big, it doesn't even notice it's there, but it's there. The moon and the Earth feel each other. The sun and the Earth feel each other, because they have to.
So how do you, if a force is running against you, let's say you're in your leg extensions, but you can't keep it up, which law would that apply to?
It can apply to it applies to all of them. It's just it's just what question we want to ask. So let me pull up, because all of the laws build upon each other. Like they're all in the same. Let me pull up one that we could talk about. All right. So inertia, linear inertia, would be like if the person started, like he just got into the machine, and let's say he had the stack all the way down. Well, that stack is going to resist change in its motion proportional to its mass. So the lower we put the stack, the more it's going to resist change in its motion. Second law says, well, what's trying to change its motion? Forces. So his legs pushing on the padding, redirecting through the different systems and cables are literally trying to lift this weight stack up. F is equal to ma. The mass of this plate stack will change its motion, speed up going up, speed going down, up and down, change its motion based off of the amount of force we're given to this pad. We have to apply, like when he just gets into the machine, in order to make that stack go up, he has to give it more force than what planet Earth is pulling down. Like, he has to be greater, because if he can't be greater, it's never going to move. And then Newton's third law is, well, if his shin is pushing on that pad, pad's got to push on his back on his shin. So like if you had a bruise right there, you'd feel it, because the pad has to push back on you with the same amount of force as you pushing on the pad. So this tug of war has nothing to do with shin versus pad. They will always feel the exact same. This tug of war is muscles working through the levers and the pulleys representing their force at the shin, and this weight stack going through their levers and pulleys representing their force through the pads. So the reality is muscles versus weight stack, which makes sense in us. And our representation of those forces are happening here. But the pad and the shins will always feel the same. But the fight isn't between this is more than this or this is more than that, because they can't be more than the other. If I'm not pushing it, it's not pushing me. I push on it more, it's pushing me more. The fight is that versus this through the representation of this content. I will not go into, I'm going to try to do examples, but all of the Newton stuff is going to literally be resistance to change, if I put on more weight, it's gonna resist more change in the motion. That would be an example of. The sum of all the forces trying to change something's motion. Like it, literally, if I ask it, it's gonna be in the definition. What the pad feels from the shin is what the shin feels from the pad. It's third law, right? So those, I will not ask an open-ended question. Like I wouldn't ask, what laws are happening here? The answer is all the laws are always happening everywhere. It's just to filter them and say inertia is resistance to change motion based off of how much stuff. Newton's second law is, well, forces influence kinetics, influence kinematics. That relationship is Newton's second law. And then the third law is how different objects feel each other.
So I understand that the weight is the same, but the moment changes. So with the moment being greater, we go above.
In this exercise, the weight would stay the same, but the moment would also stay the same. And the reason is because you're in an expensive machine who is going to change its application of its push to your shin. Gravity alone can't do that, right? So an example of the weight stays the same, but the moment changes would be our ankle cuff example. Or I mean, I could just use the mass of my leg. Right here in a flexed position, gravity's not trying to flex me. Does that make sense? So if there's no external moment, why would there need to be an internal muscle moment? But if you're in this machine, this person could totally be in a flexed 90-degree position, but that machine's still trying to flex it. Does that make sense? So the machines, one of the positives about machines is they maintain more consistent moment. So that way your muscles have to maintain more of a consistent moment through the range of motion. The negatives, expensive and they take up a lot of space. And if you're doing home health, you're not going to roll up with an 18-wheeler of equipment, right? So what I feel one of my jobs to teach you guys, I'm just introducing you to this concept, but how we can have consistent weight and consistent moment, or we could have consistent weight and inconsistent moment of, lateral raises. Down here, I can hold this position all day. Not up here, even though the weight is the same. My arms, mass is the same, the dumbbells are the same. But as I go up, the moment gets greater and greater and greater and greater and greater. So therefore, my muscle moment has to get greater and greater and greater and greater. But if I was in a machine, down here, the machine is pushing me in. And now the machine's trying to push me down. The machine can change its direction of push as I go through a range of motion to keep the moment more consistent, and thus my muscles are working through more of a range of motion. And we talked about some different things that you guys may do to counter limitations of moment, like manual resistance, right? Like if you're working with someone and, I'm not saying yoink on their leg, but just like if as they flex and you know that the moment is going to get less and less and less, maybe you start putting a manual resistance there. And as they go out, you can lessen, lessen, lessen. So or reposition them is an example we used in class, where if you know that the moment is going to be the greatest in an extended anatomical position and it's going to be the least in a flexed position, right? There's zero moment from gravity here. Reposition them so that now the moment is the greatest here and it's going to get less and less and less and less and less, pardon my lack of flexibility. But you see, you might reposition them. And you do a few sets where the moment's the greatest here, reposition, do a few sets where the moment's greatest there. You can apply this in a lot, if anybody's ever done cables, like the moment changes. So like you can reposition yourself where if you know that the moment is going to be the greatest here and the moment is going to be the least here, right? If the cable's over there, least, greatest. Well, maybe reposition yourself so that it can be the greatest in a new position, and you can do a few ranges of motion where the greatest is what traditionally might have been the least. It's just introducing you to these things so that you can then kind of play with them as you want. Does that make sense where the weight is consistent and the moment would be more consistent?
Yes.
Good, good, good. Absolutely. And this is where I'm varying from previous classes. We used to go into this a lot more detail. But what I found was it was getting a lot more confusing. And that's on me. It's my job to adapt and learn. So all I'm holding you accountable for, if you notice the pattern is trade-offs, pros and cons of each and how we would trade off. Simultaneous motion is literally what it sounds like, multiple joint motions happening at the same time. And when you do simultaneous movement strategies, the pros is more accuracy and more force applied on something else, which go hand in hand, because if you're trying to give as much juice as you can to something else, you want that force to be accurate. You don't want to have wasted force. That makes sense? So force and accuracy tend to go hand in hand. I give you an example. If I was doing a vertical jump and I was trying to push on the ground as hard as I can to go up as high as I can, and I drifted forward a foot, I wasted some energy, right? I could have been more accurate, and thus I could have gone up a little higher, but I was slang. So that wasted force got me across, so I don't get any credit for landing forward a foot. So force and accuracy. The trade-off of force and accuracy is speed. I'm going to use this really silly analogy, but can you imagine pro baseball and a pitcher like throwing a baseball like this, or throwing a baseball like a dart? I mean, you may throw a strike. It's about to get served up, at 117 on the bat. So how we generate significant velocities is what inherently makes us special as humans. We sequence our motion. We don't do everything at the same time. We do things one at a time. The difference is if you were lining up to play, do they still play Red Rover? We used to play that back in the day. And like people would fall on their head and stuff, and we had to stop. When you play Red Rover, you line up side by side, right? Side by side. When you line up to go to lunch, though, you line up in sequence, one at a time. When we do joint motions in sequence, one at a time, the first thing is it can't be too heavy because each joint, when it gets called upon to do a job, has to be able to handle that load by itself. They're on an island. One of the reasons I can't throw a shot put like I do a baseball is when it comes time for my shoulders to do a job, they can't handle all that by themselves. But when I do joint motions one at a time, it allows me to increase what I call our acceleration road. I have more time to speed up. It's like if you have a fancy sports car, but you keep it in the garage, it's not going to go fast. You have to give it road in order to speed up. So if I do all my joint motions all at the same time, I'm going to hit the end of my range of motion soon. But if I do all of my joint motions in sequence, I could speed up the ball here, I could speed up the ball here, I could speed up the ball here, and then I could speed up the ball there. Trying to do a sequence motion in slow motion is tough. But what I can do is show you some examples. Javelin throws forever. Yeah, I'm a Mets fan. I'm still not over it. so we agree that his lower half is doing action stuff, right? He's abducting his right hip. His shoulder hadn't even started to catapult yet. He's prepping his upper extremity while his lower extremity's action. But notice how, like again, his shoulder hasn't started catapulting yet. But all the stuff on the bottom has contributed to the velocity of the ball. And then the shoulder, the whip of the elbow, because the elbow extension is actually just inertia. You can't contract fast enough to keep up with how this stuff is happening. And then the final whip of the tip of the back. This is happening at blinding speeds. Our eyes can't process this. This is a slow motion camera and we still see blur. This is happening very fast. If anybody's ever watched baseball, I love watching baseball because I'm fascinated by parabolas. But if you're watching a pitcher, you're like, I see the ball, I see the ball, I see the ball, and then all of a sudden it's a because it's happening, not me, I'm so slow, but just it's happening too fast for our eyes to be able to process. You can't do that if you threw the ball like this, or if you threw the ball like this. It has to be a sequenced motion so that every joint motion can piggyback on the motion. Think of it like this. If you were riding in a bus and you were sitting at the back of the bus and the bus is going 70 miles an hour down the road and you started running to the front of the bus, technically you'd be running more than 70 miles an hour. That makes sense? Because it would be the speed of the bus plus whatever speed you ran to the front. That's what's happening here. This is the bus that goes faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And then I get to sprint from the back of the bus to the front of the bus while the bus has already taken off. I could throw 100 miles an hour. Just put me on a bus that's already going like 85, and then I throw the ball. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about picking. The reason a towel pops, the reason a whip cracks, is because the tip of that towel or the tip of that whip creates a little sonic boom. It's going faster than sound. And the only way that's possible, I can't do that with the towel by doing this. I have to make every part of that towel be able to piggyback on the part that came before it until the final tip is going very fast. That's sequence motion. So the pros of sequence motion is significant speeds of our distal segments. The trade-off is accuracy. It's hard to make something go fast and make it go where you want it. It's hard. It's not to say it can't be done. It just means it's not easy. The greatest golfers in the world hit tee shots with ridiculous velocities. How often do they hit it in the middle of the green of the fairway? The best in the world. It's hard to make something go fast, thus make it go far and make it go straight. Absolutely. Did this answer the sequence simultaneous question? I was trying to stop it right at the ground. Guys, that is not normal. I'll do the levers it puts. In addition, try to, without cheating, try to sit upright. Don't lean your trunk back and take your shoulder and try to bring your catapult back as far as you can. Play around if you want to try. Now, this dude throws 100 miles an hour. He's leaning forward. He's leaning forward, and his forearm is parallel with the ground. You know what that's called? A freak. But when I say it, I mean it complimentary. Like this is Shaquille O'Neal being 7 foot, and you say, oh, they must be good at basketball. We don't see pitchers' gifts because it's happening so fast, and it could be anybody, short, tall. Their Shaquille O'Neal gift of being tall is their abnormal range of motion for their catapult. That's where the magic is. And one of my big passions when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pitcher, but I couldn't crack 75 miles an hour. And I had coaches saying, oh, it's all in your mechanics. Anybody could throw 90. And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out all this stuff to throw 90. We're going to find out I didn't have the gift. My catapult didn't go back like these guys do and these girls do. That's why we have so many Tommy John treatments. A lot of stress. All right. Basic. Everything on this test, guys, is going to be basic. In mechanics, we have simple machines. They're meant to help us do work easier. In our bodies, we have levers and pulleys. Leverage is going to be how our muscles work with our bones to get trade-offs of speed and torque. On the test, it's all going to be function, purpose. If you're trying to balance, first-class arrangements are great for that. If you're trying to change the direction of applied force, first-class arrangements are great for that. You pull one end down, the other end goes up. First, though, could favor speed or could favor torque. That stuff is too confusing for now. If I'm asking you a first-class question, it's balance or change direction. Seconds and thirds have very specific leverage favorabilities. Seconds favor torque at the detriment of speed. Thirds favor speed at the detriment of torque. There's a reason when you step on a rake, it swings up and smashes you fast. It's because the rake isn't heavy. But if you applied your force not close to the axis, but if you tied a rope to the end of the rake, there's no way you're going to lift it up as fast as when you step on the rake handle. But you could lift a heavy rake, like if that rake all of a sudden magically weighed 300 pounds, there's no way you're going to bring it up by stepping on the prong. You're going to have to apply your force very far away, get a much bigger moment at the detriment of speed. So it's all about those trade-offs. For pulleys are very specific to muscles. Pulleys in the body help muscles have better angles of pull. Pulleys in the body help muscles have better torque. And there's different ways they can do it. I told you on the test, I'm only holding you accountable for 3. The first one is you got a bone inside the muscle tendon that helps the angle of pull. That's what sesamoids are. Literally, there's a bone inside the muscle that helps its leverage. And think about it, a pulley, a pull. What pulls? Muscles pull. This is all about helping muscles create rotational influences at joints. So the first class, literally bone inside the tendon itself can help its leverage, can help its pull. Who cares about this? Some of you may go to optometry school, have fun with second-class pulleys. The joint itself, look at how those condyles, so like the patella is in the front, but those condyles are more medial. It's serving the same function. That muscle is coming in at a certain angle, and then all of a sudden, the pulley of that joint helps that angle of inclination, and now all of a sudden, that muscle is pulling a lot more rotary than it would be if those condyles weren't there. The bones, the condyles of the joint itself. Now, what's different between that and the patella? The patella is literally inside the muscle. Literally floating inside the tendon itself. So it's a similar mechanism. It's just the actual mechanism is different. One is a bone literally inside the tendon, and the other is the tendon going around some big bone to help its leverage, to help its angle. And then the last one I'm holding you accountable for, who cares about this one, is where a muscle can serve as a piggyback for another muscle, helping its mechanical pull, helping its leverage. So in the body, we're going to see how you have like muscles that are deep and then muscles that are superficial. In this case, the brachialis, the biceps brachii gets to sit on top of the brachialis to help the biceps brachii have a better angle, like a piggyback effect. the gastroc gets to sit on top of the soleus to have a better angle of pull. So in this class, it's just muscles serve as a pulley for other muscles. They get to piggyback on top. Was that it? And that's literally all I would ask. Balance first. Change direction. Hamstrings pull the ischium down so that your upper body can come up first. Seconds favor torque at the expense of speed. Thirds favor speed at the expense of torque. And I think I emphasized in the lecture, we do not classify levers based off of the joint. We don't say the elbow is A, the wrist is A, because you have different muscles that cross every one of those joints, and some of them insert closer to, some of them insert further away. The ones that insert closer to are going to have more third advantage, and the further away are going to have more seconds. So you can't say that the ankle is A, the knee is A. You have to look at it muscle by muscle. Because different muscles are going to have different advantages or disadvantages based on where they insert relative to the joint. All right, we're good? I promise I am literally going to go through the materials and try to screenshot certain things. I promise I'm going to try to make this as upfront and basic as what we did in class. That's my promise to you.